Okay, good evening again, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I think the end of the ice cream line is in sight, so all they should miss is my introduction, so they will be okay. Good evening and welcome to Antrim. Thank you for coming. If you don't know me, my name is Adam Meredith. I'm the lead pastor here, and it's my privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening, although I don't think I will give you as warm of a welcome as you had this morning from your father-in-law, Matt, but truly glad that you are here. I first became familiar enough with identifying and understanding critical race theory enough to speak against it last fall. It was the September 27th message here. You can catch it online, little shameless self-plug there. But in all seriousness, the reality is that there are speakers who can address topics like this in a far more comprehensive, specific way than I can as a pastor. And we are privileged to have one of them with us tonight. His name is Matthew Odegaard. Matt is, among other things, a podcaster from Houston, Texas. That is a little bit of a recent move for them. Traveling in for us, I spoke at our morning services this morning, did a great job and blessed us. Great challenge on the importance of fatherhood in today's world and in our culture. And obviously, you've seen the banners. It's why you're here. I've seen online. We're going to talk about critical race theory tonight. And so we've asked Matt to help us as a church, as a community, to understand why, and I'll say this plainly and then let Matt do the heavy lifting as far as why, but help us understand why critical race theory is incompatible with the gospel, why it's not compatible with biblical truth, with a biblical worldview. And so to understand that, understand a little bit where it comes from, and why and how we need to stand against it in our communities. So the Apostle Paul, in many of his epistles, talks about things like not being taken captive by fine-sounding but deceptive philosophies. That's Colossians chapter 2. Or not being blown to and fro by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men. And there's deceitful scheming. That's Ephesians chapter 4. And so that's the type of thing that we want to be aware of and fully trusting and praying that the Lord will use tonight and use Matt to help us stand firm in that regard. So I'm going to ask, would you pray with me as we begin? Father, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for tonight, for this time, for the crowd that has gathered, and for Matt being able to be here with us tonight. Lord, we ask that you would bless and greatly use this time. We know that these issues very often have tended to derail into heated arguments and an unwillingness to listen to one another and just getting upset very quickly. We don't want that to be the case here tonight. Let this be a time of goodwill, of peace, of understanding and mutual respect, all rooted in the reconciliation of your gospel. We believe that the shed blood of Jesus Christ makes us right with God, and having been made right with you, then we are also brought into unity with one another. We pray that you would advance that work here tonight and give us greater understanding, greater clarity as you do that. Bless Matt. Give him, direct his thoughts, give him the ability to pull lots of different complex ideas together tonight. And we pray that you would be pleased to use this in a powerful and special way. And I ask it in Jesus' name, amen. One final thing that I forgot to mention, those of you who have cell phones, and particularly internet-capable cell phones, if at any point you have a question this evening, you can go to our webpage, which is antrimbic.org. If you go to antrimbic.org, scroll down, you will see the ad for this evening's event. And with that ad, there's a little button that says, submit a question. All right, you click that button, and if you can get that far, I trust you to be able to type out the question and finish the rest of the way. But you click that button and send it in. We'll be monitoring those questions. And I believe the general plan is for Matt to have about an hour here to give the information. So any questions that you have during that time, send them in. We'll be monitoring them and sending them on to Matt as fitting and appropriate toward the end. So just to give you some idea what to expect. Having said all that, would you welcome Matt Odegaard?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Adam, very much. And thanks for being here. I apologize. This is going to be awkward, but I have to adjust this slightly, and I have to get down to do it. Oh, there we go. All right. So my name is Matt, as Adam said, and I have been a pastor for many, many years, and I was trained as a pastor. Before that, I was actually trained in classical education, Greek and Roman civilization, and Greek language, all the exciting things that you normally study in college, right? And I have always been interested in worldview because it's important as a believer to understand what is going on in the world so that we can fulfill the Great Commission that Jesus calls us to at the end of Matthew, to go and make disciples. And just as Paul walked around the hill in Athens in Acts 17, he had to think about what was going on and survey the land and figure out what he was going to say to the philosophers before talking to them. And he, obviously a very schooled, learned man, was able to have some great conversations with the philosophers there. I apologize. Technology sometimes hates me, so I apologize for that. I'll do my best to not distract you there. So what I want to talk about tonight, it's interesting. I read through the Bible every year, and so I read every day a different portion, and it just comes up. And I just want to read this for you because Paul, just about to die in a cell in Rome because he had preached the gospel and people didn't like that, has a guy that he is mentoring named Timothy, and he's saying, hey, here's some things. Writes him a couple of letters. We have those. You can read those, 1st and 2nd Timothy. And this is the passage that came up for me today. And I appreciate this, and I want to read it just so that you understand what we're dealing with. And I'm going to address this subject from a Christian worldview because that is the place where I come from. And this subject comes through, I'll show you a chart in a moment, but it comes through a very wandering line of all sorts of philosophy. And what I want to read for you, and this is Paul telling Timothy what to do and kind of what's going to happen about it. This is out of 2 Timothy 4. Preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, correct, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not tolerate sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, that's Paul for you. They will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and will turn aside to myths. But as for you, use self-restraint in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, and fulfill your ministry. I really like that verse because it reminds us of a couple of things. This postmodern deconstruction of truth, which we'll talk about, if you don't know any of those words, we'll talk about that in a moment, is not new in the sense that this has always been a battle of what God says and what the world says. And so we're going to look at that a little bit tonight, and we're going to just evaluate together what this whole thing is about. And so I'm a Christian. I've already mentioned that. I'm a pastor, husband, father of 4, so this is personally interesting to me. As Adam mentioned, I live in Texas now, and I lived in California for a lot of time before that. Some of you are familiar with California or have heard of it, or maybe you've even been there. They're different, I'm just saying they're a little bit different. And so this particular topic came up while I was there, and then I continued to research it upon leaving. But it's just an interesting thing to look at. And the reality is, I'd rather not deal with this. I'd rather just preach the gospel. I'd rather just tell people about Jesus because that is a better end for me. I think people need to know what this world is all about and where they're going. But unfortunately, because we live in this world, we have to know what this world is doing. So I have now spent countless hours over the course of my career studying philosophies of all kind and world religions of all kind and this type of thing as well. So we're going to be looking at this, and we're going to be talking about critical race theory, but specifically we're talking about how we live as believers in this broken world. So that is the lens that I'm coming after, and many of you may be followers of Jesus, many of you may not, and that's okay. This is just the perspective of the Bible as seen by all of this. So that's the foundation that I believe you need to come from, because I would say we may speak with the tongues of men and angels, but accomplish nothing if we don't come from that place. So, what I'd like to do tonight is talk about the problem. Why is critical race theory so contentious? And obviously it is. This has been an interesting thing. I was talking to a couple of people earlier, and they said, no, we'd have like 15 people. So we have more because this has taken over this country and others, actually. So we're going to look at why it is so contentious. We're going to look at the definition, and I am going to focus on not my definition, but the founder's definition, but that is also part of the problem, which we'll talk about. And we will spend a few moments on history, because it's important to understand the history of where this comes from so that we can understand why it is so prevalent in our land today. And finally, we'll get to a proposal. This is a proposal hopefully for believers, if not just everyone, and steps forward. So, the problem. It is contentious and so prevalent right now because of the very confusion that it brings. It is hard to define. And what I want to start with actually is just language as its essence. We need to understand that communication is the key to everything, and in this instance, it's the key to understanding what's going on, and it's really difficult to define something if you don't know what you're saying. And the problem is, I will just say the left, and I'm using that term in terms of the ideological left, the progressive left that has existed, again, for a long, long time, has redefined a bunch of the words that we think we know what we mean. So when we say certain words, and other people say certain words, we're not using the words in the same way, and that's part of the problem. When you hear words like racism, anti-racism, heteronormativity, heterosexuality, queer, black feminist studies, white fragility, white privilege, and on and on and on, words like that, if you don't know a bunch of those words, that's okay. That's sort of part of the point. It's really hard to talk through these things when there are all these words that either we think we know what they mean, or we've literally never heard of before. And that's what makes even the definition of this whole theory or praxis, as it really is, difficult. So many people, I believe, just think it is on its face what it says, critical race theory. And if that were true, that would be wonderful, because who does not agree? I would guess there is not one person who would say, let's not be critical of racism. We should be critical of racism. 100% every time. If you see racism, if you hear about racism, you should criticize it, you should stop it, you should intervene every single time, 100%. That's not what this is. That's the problem. It's not what we're talking about, and it gets very confusing as we go on from there. And you get lumped into this place where talking about it is difficult because the terms themselves are so jumbled up, and again, language is the core of what we're talking about here. So you have people, and that's why you can have, and you may have seen this, some people saying critical race theory doesn't even exist. Like they really have said it doesn't even exist. Or we don't teach it at all, or it's not anywhere. Or we really appreciate it and we need to teach it everywhere. And both of those two things can exist because depending on where you are in the definition, you're saying the same thing. So I just have a couple of slides. This was one teachers union that said, critical race theory it's reasonable and appropriate, and we're going to teach it to all the kids. And actually, I think this is the one that says, it is too complicated to teach to K through 12 students, so we're not teaching it to K through 12 students. The byline is a little funny there. And then the second one, another teachers union that says we're going to use it in every place that we can. And these are two teachers unions across America who are saying contradictory things. And again, how can that be true? It's true in the sense that it depends how you define it. And just to get into that for a moment, it's true because you're not going into a fourth grade classroom and saying, open up to page 33 of your textbook, and now we're going to look at critical race theory. Of course not. That wouldn't make sense because, as we'll find out in just a moment, this was designed, and it's the brainchild of a law study. And if you've ever met a lawyer, if you are a lawyer, if you've read any legal textbooks, they are incredibly dense to read. And that's a tricky part. So we're not going to do that. However, what we'll also find out is the ideology, the presence of this is across all lines, and we'll look at that more in a moment. But this is a worldview. It comprises the whole world. Here's the best way, I think here's an analogy for you. Gravity. I think gravity is a good analogy. You may or may not know Newton. You may or may not know the laws of gravity. And ultimately, that doesn't matter. You know that if you throw something up, it's going to come down. It may come down on your neighbor's head. That's just what's going to happen. What goes up must come down. Every kid knows that. Everyone knows that. And you don't have to learn all of the features of gravity. You don't have to learn all the math. You don't have to learn all of the theory to know that's true. Critical race theory exists in a largely similar fashion where, according to its proponents, it exists everywhere. We'll see a definition in just a moment to that effect. And so you don't have to know it, you don't have to say it for it to be true and for it to exist. That is what makes it a little tricky to deal with. So let's get into some definitions. But before we get there, this is just an introduction to it. It did begin in the 70s. And so this is not new. That's why this is so interesting that all of you are interested in it. And everyone across America apparently is interested in it on one way or another. And it is very contentious, and people are very upset about it in certain ways on both sides, all the sides. This is very divisive, and the thing about it is it's not new. It's not new at all, and it even goes back further than that. But we'll start in the 70s for now. And I'll just say, again, it began as a legal perspective and a way to identify certain things. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to say before that, again, in terms of history, we want to teach history. History is very important, and we can all agree that there has been racism in America. And we all know that we fought a bloody war to end slavery, and we are one of the few countries to actually do that to end slavery. Slavery has been present in the world for basically every civilization in all of the world. But this country did fight a war to end it. But racism was there. And Jim Crow, that's a real thing. And there were laws about segregation. And those are all terrible, terrible things. And people should know that. People should know about that. And people should know how terrible that was so that we do not do that kind of thing again. It is not good for humanity, regardless of who you are. That is a terrible, terrible thing to do. All of these things are terrible things to do. And we should teach that. And the reality is, we do. I grew up in public school, and I learned all about Civil War and all sorts of things, and political science and a bunch of things that happened there. So we do teach that, and we want to teach more of that, for sure. That's fine. The problem is, in this theory, that's not the standpoint that it comes from, and we're going to look at that in just a moment. There are also, I will just say this outright, there are still racist people today. That is true. And unfortunately, this will ever be true. This is going to sound terrible to some, but the reason it will be true is, unfortunately, in this world, there is still sin. You can read Romans. Paul gives a long talk about this in Romans through 3 and 6 and on, that without God, without Jesus in our lives, there is sin, and all have sinned. And because racism is definitely a sin, it will be in this world until Jesus comes again. That's just the truth of it. And again, as believers, we should call it out wherever and whenever we see it. That is 100% true. We need to do that. So we need to look at the definition, and we need to look at what this is. And before we get to that, we need to understand that it has expanded, and it is in certain schools. Obviously, it is in some secondary schools and some colleges, but it is in elementary schools as well. And it is in those schools because the way teachers are taught, this is a function of education, and it has been. And whether or not, you can give the benefit of the doubt, maybe some people don't understand, but when you use language, like some of the words I rattled off earlier, that is part of the theory. And if you begin delving into part of this, then you are using it, and you are using it to view the world. And it is in Hollywood, and it is in the media and politics and the church as well. And the other thing to know about it, right before we get to the definition, is that it's not technically a theory. Again, this is all about language, and language is the important thing. And sometimes people name things to be a little bit misleading. Critical race theory is not technically a theory because, as we'll note in a moment, in the definition, it actually involves a activist movement. It has to have this activist component, which means you're doing something, which, again, in definitions, a theory is not something you do. A theory shows you what something is. A movement and an activity is something that you do. Those are different things. It would be better if this were named something else, and then perhaps it would be easier for us to talk about, but unfortunately, some things are named perhaps to mislead. This also comes from another school of theory that we'll look at in the history in just a moment. So I'm going to read this one. This is from, first it came through Derek Bell. He was the first one that's credited with this. There's Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Gene Stefanchik, and some others. But we'll read out of the textbook that is called Critical Race Theory, an introduction by Delgado and Stefanchik. Again, this language, I could read this whole thing for you, but the language is, it's hard for me to use like the appropriate word. I would say obtuse. Do you know what obtuse means? Like it just is hard to see through. It's just a type of language that I think, again, because it's a law type program, it's very thick and philosophical. So what I'm going to read here, I'll read this part. Sorry, I'm getting this ring. Maybe if I hold this up, it'll be better. What do critical race theorists believe? Probably not every member, this is reading from the textbook, probably not every member would subscribe to every tenet set out in this book, but many would agree on the following propositions. Now, I'm going to just abbreviate a little of this for time. You can go look up this quote. It's in the textbook, and the textbook is widely available. First, that racism is ordinary. Racism is ordinary. And then second, most would agree that our system of white over color ascendancy serves important purposes, both psychic and material. The first feature, ordinariness, means that racism is difficult to cure or address. The second feature, sometimes called interest convergence, I'm just going to skip some because, again, you're probably already falling asleep. It's hard language, right? This racism advances the interest of both white elites and working class. Large segments of society have little incentive to eradicate it. So that is out of the textbook. So the point here is, in number one, that racism is central to the human experience. It is ordinary. In other words, it is ever present in everything. I liken this to a lens. You can even think of it as a pair of glasses that you wear that you see everything through. So in everything is racism. And then second, it is that the white over color ascendancy, the hierarchy of white over anyone else, is the hierarchy that is ordered in this world. So this is their definition, not mine. So it affects every aspect, and I'm not supposed to be talking about this because I am the person that is over, so this is how this works, and this is why, we were reading a couple of posts earlier that I'm not allowed to talk about this because of who I am, but I guess, I'm sorry, I don't accept that. I don't accept it in the terms of my first identity is believer of Jesus, and I'll just put a period after that. That really is it, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but this affects every aspect of every life. And this is where you get the idea of woke, which you've probably heard, because if you understand this, if you can comprehend this, then you are awakened to the way the world really is. And if you don't, you are not awake, you are not woke, you don't understand the dynamics that occur in the world. And this is the dynamic of oppressor and oppressed. It's the dynamic of oppressor and oppressed. It is this lens to view the entire world. Ben Carson, who was on the news a few days ago, I thought I liked the way that he talked about this, so I'm going to play for you this clip. It's a little bit hard to understand. I love him. He talks a little bit softly, so just listen in to what he has to say.
It's an attempt to use race as a mechanism for redefining our society, redefining what it was based on and how it impacts everybody. And it wants our people to believe that your race is the most critical determinant of who you are and what happens to you in our society. In other words, it's a bunch of garbage.
Sorry, I just like that end part. Anyway, I absolutely love him. I love that when he was running for president, they were like, what did you do, whatever. They're like, I ran a campaign, whatever. And he's like, what did he do? Surgically remove 2 twins or something at the brain, or the only person to ever do that? I mean, like, that guy, right? Like, anyway, he's on another level. At any rate, it is hard to define. My point is, it's hard to define. Language is really important. You need to begin to understand the language, and hopefully, after all this, if you don't hate me, that's fine if you do. If you don't, you'll just appreciate that these terms are important to listen for, and I'll give some pointers on what we can do in just a little bit, but I think what we need to do as well is just look at a little bit of the history, because the history will help us understand this dynamic through the lens of race, as Dr. Carson has pointed out, that affects the entire worldview, and it views the world in terms of oppressor and oppressed. So CRT, critical race theory, comes from the larger school of capital T theory. And this comprises a lot of different things. And it is, again, very complicated. And that's why when you're asked for a definition, like CNN had a definition the other day, and it was kind of gobbledygook. It didn't really mean anything. I don't know what they meant by it. I don't think anybody knew what they meant by it. And various other news reports have had definitions of this. It seems like they just kind of make up something that makes their point true. Again, I read you basically the definition of what they had. Other people have given very clinical definitions based on some of what you'll see in this next slide in just a moment. But the point is, this comes from a larger school of theory that describes all kinds of different things. The school of theory comes from the Frankfurt School, which comes out of Gramsci, and it comes out of Marx, and there's a whole bunch of people that are in the line, and I just want to show you this, just to make your head spin a little bit. So this is, someone has put together this taxonomy of certain things, and I know it's super small. There's some highlights here. One of the red ones is Karl Marx, and then it's a flow chart, and it goes down, and there's Gramsci, and then you can kind of see sort of in the middle, there's the Frankfurt School, and Marcuse is in the middle of there, and he had a lot to do with this, and then it kind of goes through, but you have post-Marxism, but then you also have the feminism that happens over here, and that kind of plays in as it all comes back together, and you have black feminism, and then you go into this other cultural materialism. There's postmodernism that happens, and then post-structuralism. Anyway, I've already bored you all. I know that. But the point is, this is really, really super complicated because all of these things crash together. Freud is even on there in the middle because he has to do with a little bit of this with the psychological stuff. Again, I'm telling you, it is very, very complicated and where it comes from. But the reason I show you this chart is to show you that at least in this section where we're talking about theory and we're talking about the Frankfurt School, it all has to do with the dynamic of power. And that's the important thing to note. The dynamic of power is all about who has power and who does not have power, which is exactly the same as what Marx originally came to. Actually, Hegel did before him, but again, I don't want to get in the weeds on all this stuff because it's very complicated. So you've probably heard of Marx, you've probably heard of Russia, you've probably heard of communism, those things. I think it's very interesting right now that the things that are happening in Cuba, we're seeing the end of communism, though many people in the news will not even admit that communism is real. It just blows my mind. Again, after studying world history and a bunch of different periods in time, like communism, it just doesn't work. That's just point of fact. I mean, no one has been able to disprove that at this point. But anyway, the goal is power, and this theory, many of the theories, as you see, show different imbalances of power. Critical race theory is one of these, and of course, that imbalance of power is the imbalance of power within race. And as we heard through the definition, the imbalance of power is leaning towards, in the natural state, in the ordinary state, as you heard, white being having the power, and everything else not having power. So in critical theory, the system that oppresses was put in place by the power, and it must be identified, and hear this word, destroyed. The goal is to destroy the system. It's not necessarily to replace it, because, again, it gets really confusing. But the point is, if you can balance the system of power over time, at some point in time, as soon as you balance everything and you get everything aligned perfectly, this is what Hegel, Marx, Gramsci, Marcuse, all these other ones believed, that eventually, at the end of time, there will be this wonderful place where everyone lives in harmony. This is the goal. The goal is you get to this place at the end of time, in this time, on this earth, where everyone will be in harmony, and they call that utopia. And unfortunately, if you are a believer and you've studied any Bible or read any Bible, you know that's not the way the world works. We don't get to have heaven on earth. It sounds amazing, and I would love it to be true. That's also why this is very attractive to people. Who doesn't want heaven on earth? It's like the person running for high school president or whatever. You say you get free Slurpees for the whole year. Like, yes, everybody wants that. Why don't you want that? I want heaven on earth. But unfortunately, as great as it sounds, it just doesn't work. We have great examples of this. Russia. Communist China is not doing so good. Cuba, we just saw that. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela was the most rich material country almost on the planet, and it's a dustbin. It is terrible what is going on down there. Anyway, sorry, it's hard not to get distracted with all of the things that are going on. So, because what I do is look at what happens in the world, and that's important for us. So critical theory expands these economic ideas of Marx to study of areas like gender, sexuality, identity, and race. And you also hear people calling critical race theory Marxism, and technically that's not quite true. I'm not going to correct you, but that's where you get into these battles where people say, well, critical race theory isn't real, or it isn't taught, or whatever, because you say it's Marxist. And it deals with the same power dynamics, but it is not the same. Again, that's a minor point, but it all comes down to language, and when you're talking to somebody who says it doesn't exist, that's how you can wiggle through this a little bit, and it's a very slippery language when you start redefining all of these words. Marx was kind of the grandfather of all of this, and that's how he plays in. And he believed that once capitalism was destroyed, then everything would be perfect and we would reach that utopia. In the same way, critical theorists, once you remove the structures of oppression, and in this case, seemingly, according to their writings, once you remove white people from the power dynamic, then you will reach this utopia. That sounds terrible to say. Apparently, I'm also not even allowed to say that, but I'm just telling you the theory behind what this is. They will reach that utopia. And of course, this is a problem. It's a problem in application. It's a problem in application because I would say children for all stripes, all colors, if you are learning that you are oppressed or oppressor, then you are learning to divide, you are learning to discriminate, you are learning to hate, and that is not what we should be teaching our children. I'm just, again, speaking from a biblical worldview. We're supposed to be teaching them how to love one another. That is, in fact, what Jesus said. And then Paul has a lot to say about this too, which we'll get to in just a moment. But we need to teach them how to love, not to hate, how not to discriminate. And we're going to read from a moment from one of the more popular speakers right now, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who talks intentionally about discrimination. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But what I want to show you is a couple of eventualities that happen when you start teaching some of these things in schools. And I know there's a lot of heat that's happening. Is it in schools? Is it not in schools? All of these things. It is in some schools. I'm not putting that out on any of you here. I'm just saying it is in some schools. It may not even be in these schools. It may not even be in this state. I can't say. I'm not in any of those environments. All I can say is it is in some schools. And here's a couple of responses from people that happened in some of these schools. So the first one is this black mother who sued the school after she said her biracial son received failing grades in sociology for refusing to confess his white dominance. This is the problem that we get into, because now all of a sudden, if you're oppressor and oppressed, which one are you? And that's just, it hurts my heart. It's terrible to put these poor children who don't know any better or any different, like we're teaching them to hate each other, and then how do you negotiate that as a poor child who loves his mom and loves his dad? And it hurts me. I'm going to show you this next one too. This is a father who is talking about this, and I would say he does perhaps a better way than I do talking about this. So I'll let him say.
My name's Ian Rice. I've got 2 children here at the California School District. It's very apparent here by all of the parents that have spoken that this board and the school district is failing. More importantly, I came here to talk about critical race theory. This theory was never meant to be brought into grade schools, high schools, at all. It's actually taught in the collegiate atmosphere, and more importantly, the legal portion of the collegiate atmosphere, to see different laws through the lens of race, from an ethics and an ethical standpoint, right? Not for grade schools and high schools. The problem with bringing it to high school and grade school level is that we don't have the educators to properly teach these kids. Instead, they're using it as their own agenda to indoctrinate the kids to hate each other. And whether you believe that to be true or not, the reality is that's what's happening. Critical race theory is teaching that white people are bad. That's not true. That would teach my daughter that her mother is evil. You already have an educator within your staff that has pulled my daughter aside and said, well, you're a minority, so you know better than to engage in certain things.
Whoa.
When I was brought to the school's attention, nothing happened to the educator. Instead, my daughter was brought in, and she was ridiculed. So my question is now, with critical race theory being brought in, what is your criteria to educate the educators? And who are you to educate my children, or any of our children, in life issues? That's our job. Your job is to teach them math and science. Our job is to teach them about life. I believe racial issues and tensions across the U.S. are nowhere near what they used to be decades ago. Do we have a long way to go? Sure. Do we still have individuals out there that need to be taught? Absolutely. But I believe the people here don't look at me as a black man. They look at me as a man standing in front of you addressing an issue that we all are very passionate about.
I think he says that very well, and he almost does it, and I wish he had gone on to say that really, and that's what I talked about this morning, some of you missed, but the family really is the place where values are supposed to be taught, where character is supposed to be taught, where faith is supposed to be taught, and yet, I mean, we have to take some of the onus of this ourselves. As he mentions, there is still work to do. We are still a mess as a society, but we need to take the onus of that and take that on, but we also need to take the onus of raising our kids in the right way. Shipping them off to school is not where they should be learning their religion, their faith, their values, and in large part, to some degree, we have done that, and we've taken the back seat as parents to do that. So I'm not going to get off and preach on that at the moment, but that is an important point, and you see some of the effects. Again, this is just one case where I can't imagine how confused that poor child was, and my heart breaks for that poor child, but we set them up for this type of situation when we start teaching this, and the problem is, again, we're not saying the words, it gets in through various and I would say subversive type situations. There is a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed that is one of the best-selling teaching books in a long time. Millions of copies have been sold, and it doesn't teach. Pedagogy is just the way you teach, what you teach, right? And it doesn't teach how to do math, it doesn't teach how to do science, it doesn't teach how to get better grades. It was written under the guise of many people, and specifically certain races are failing more than other races, which is perhaps a bad place to start, but it may address a real problem, something that we could talk about. How do we get grades up? This whole book is about how to deal with different races in a class and how to deal with the power dynamic between oppressor and oppressed. And that's not necessarily a good place to start when you're teaching kids how to be better at school. Again, school is supposed to be about learning the language, arts, and math and science and those types of things, but instead we've moved to this other subject for sure. So this has implications. It has implications in classrooms when we use that type of language with these children. Again, let me be clear. We should teach about the bad parts of history because we need to learn from them. We need to grow. In a classical liberal view, you know that you started at a point, and for instance, America started and it had slavery, but we also wrote into the first documents, we don't like that, with the words like life and liberty and justice for all and the pursuit of happiness and those types of things. We knew that people needed to be more equal. It took a long time to live up to that. So how do we live up to that rather than what you're hearing today is let's destroy it, or rather the country started under the guise of slavery or in some other areas. And we need to, I think, the better way is to learn from our mistakes. Let's grow. Let's never do them again, and let's get better. But this theory teaches no. It goes into very much postmodernism. You saw that on there, which is a theory of destruction or deconstruction, where you take everything apart and then potentially maybe put it back together if you feel like it. But many people never get to that stage. You just take everything apart, and you're hearing for that. Defund things, get rid of things, remove things. Tear down statues, get rid of all the traces of history. I don't believe that. I think we should teach us, or I think we should do more. So when you get rid of everything, then what do you put back in its place? And that's the problem with this whole thing. There is no proposal for what is next. It just says what we need to do to right the scales of power, which leads me to my next point of the implication for justice. The implication for justice, I'll show you Lady Justice here. And this is, I believe, outside of the Supreme Court. Justice is blind, and justice is blind for an intentional reason. Sorry for the ring. Justice is supposed to be blind because it should not matter whether or what you look like. It should not matter how much you have. It should not matter how much money, how much power. It shouldn't matter what you have. The justice for everyone should be the same. And this is our founders coming out of a system that was very unjust in this way. If you were a lord, if you were a lady, if you had status, if you had wealth, you could have less sentence, no sentence, who knows, right? So our founders said, no, it shouldn't matter who you are. It shouldn't matter. If you break a law, you should have the consequence for the law, which is then you get to the scales. The scales equal out. It should be the same amount of punishment for the crime that you committed. They should equal. It shouldn't be way too much punishment for a crime. It shouldn't be no punishment for a crime. It should be the same. That is why she is blind and holds the scales. So the problem with this theory is it has the beginning point that the scales are not leveled, so we have to pre-level the scales in a certain directions, take off the blindfold. Again, this is the woke component, so that now you can see the oppression already and start with a point that allows you to get to the result that is preferable. Does that kind of make sense? It gets really sticky, but this is the end result of this whole theory. Instead of being blind, then she sees. And so if justice is not blind, then it really is not justice. Instead, they're pre-weighted on something besides the law. Because the law, again, is written and, again, in the documents. It's the laws of nature and nature's God, which specifically refers to the laws of nature and nature's God are actually talking about the Bible. It's the things that you see in nature that the founders it gets into philosophy. I'm not going to get into it today. We don't have time for that. But that is literally talking about the way, just like gravity, you can see the way that life proceeds. You can see the things that are good and you can see the things that are bad. And those are written about and specifically talked about in things like the Ten Commandments, the things that are right and the things that are wrong. And we're supposed to judge people based on those things, the things that are right and the things that are wrong. This theory, amongst many of the capital T theories, seeks to remove that law because the law, as prescribed by some white people, now is also racist. So we have to remove the law, and now we have to tilt the scales of justice in the favor of the oppressed so that when there is justice, then it balances out correctly. And this is, it's postmodern deconstruction, it's things like your truth. So now we don't have a truth, we have each of your truth. Everybody has their own truth. You can find your truth, you can live your truth. And it's not one right answer. It depends on where you are standing. It literally depends on where you are standing, because you have had your experiences and you're standing over here, and I have had my experiences and I'm standing over here, and I can't know your experiences and you can't know my experiences, and then you overlay the race on top of that, and so I cannot know the different things. And to some degree that's true. I don't know the way that you have lived. I don't know what has happened in your life. But when you start judging justice and laws based on that, then you start weighing the scales in a different way. And this is why in CRT, white people, especially white men, especially Christian white men, cannot ever find the truth. This is what, from my readings, I believe this is real. A person like me cannot ever find the truth, because my standpoint, where I am standing, is the wrong standpoint. I am the oppressor, and I am not allowed to understand the standpoint of the oppressed. I am on the wrong side of this. And as I mentioned, I'm not even really supposed to be talking about this at all, because I cannot fully understand. And really, I'll talk about this more in a moment, but this is just Gnosticism with a G, Gnosticism, which is old. It's been around for a long time. It's nothing new, but it's this idea that there's secret knowledge that you can only know if you know, and if you don't know, you will never know. This is Gnosticism. And it is just a form of Gnosticism. You'll never know unless you know, and in this case, I can never know because of this theory, because of the way this overlays all of society. So, and this gets us to points like the Smithsonian, which put this out. You probably won't be able to read this, but I'm going to put this up. This is what the Smithsonian put out early last year, I believe. Yeah, it's really hard to read, but these are things that are wrong with white culture in America. And if you can see on the bottom, again, you probably can't read it, but religion is one of them. Christianity is the norm. Again, these are bad, right? This is bad. Christianity is the norm. Anything other than Judeo-Christian tradition is foreign. No tolerance for deviation from this single God concept. Let's go to the next one. It's really long, and I'm not going to read the whole thing for you. You can look it up if you want to. But things like being on time is bad. Hard work is up at the top. That's bad. The King's English rules are bad. It goes on. Being polite at the bottom, that's bad. Being polite is bad. I mean, it just... I don't know. I'm trying to be controlled, and I'm trying not to get a little bit crazy, but it makes you a little bit crazy because you're like, well, wait, I want to be nice. Like, isn't it good to be nice? No, it's not good to be nice. I don't know. Anyway, you can take that slide down, but that's the Smithsonian because these things are all inherently racist because they come from the wrong standpoint, because these things are associated with, apparently, the white culture. So, this is where we go beyond race, and we go beyond race into more ideology, because we've been talking to this point about me, as an example, who represents the wrong race in this critical race theory ideology, but you move into this ideology that says race is actually a social construct. So as part of their definition, race is a social construct. It's something we made up, which gets very confusing, and actually, I agree with that. I think we made it up. And again, I've done a whole series on like the Tower of Babel, where apparently race was created and people went in all different directions. It's fascinating, but that's not for today. It's just something that happened, and I'll get to Galatians in a moment, because this all comes through Galatians 3, where neither Greek nor Jew, slave or free, or male, female, we are all the same in Christ. We're going to get to that in a second, but this really is not about the race at all on one side. It's about the state of being. So whiteness now is a state of being. Try to follow me. I know it's complicated. You've been sitting for a while. Okay? Do we need to take a breath? All right. No one's thrown anything at me yet, so that's good. So whiteness is a state of being that includes both the race of white people and anyone who does not agree with the tenets of critical race theory. Okay, so anybody who doesn't agree with the tenets now are lumped into whiteness, regardless of what they would classify then as race, which is why you get people like Thomas Sowell, amazing thinker, economist, like probably one of the most brilliant men I've ever heard. He is black, by the way, but he is now not considered black. Vodi Bakum. This isn't me talking. I'm just telling you where this leads, right? Vodi Bakum, amazing evangelist, apologist. He's actually a sociologist. He has all the ists. Super, super smart Christian guy. And Clarence Thomas, the judge, all of these people are no longer black. And this is where you get, I mean, okay, you can throw something at me for this, but this is where you get where a president says something like, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. That's where it's ridiculous, but it's true in this standpoint. Do you understand that? Like, when you don't go along with this ideology, you no longer get to be who you are, I guess. That's how crazy, I mean, I hesitate to call things crazy, but that's how off-center these types of things get. And this is standpoint epistemology. This is where if you can only identify from where you are standing, and regardless then of race, if you go to the other side of where this critical race theory is standing, you are no longer in the club, so to say. So this is where you get to Asian white supremacy. I know, it's exhausting. Okay, so this is what happens. I'm going to show you this article. This is where, if you are, next one please. If you are white, statistically, and you are attacked, it will be by a white person. If you are black, statistically, it will be by a black person. In Asians, again, this is all according to race lines, which personally I really hate and I don't like talking about at all, but this is the world that they've created, so we have to talk about this a little bit. This is where, I don't know if you can read this, white supremacy is the root of all race-related violence in the US. So this is an article by Jennifer Ho, Professor of Asian American Studies, University of Colorado, Boulder. And the point here is anti-Asian racism that has the same source as anti-black racism, white supremacy. So when a black person attacks an Asian person, the encounter is fueled by racism, but specifically white supremacy. White supremacy does not require a white person to perpetuate it. Okay? I know, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to explain it. This isn't me. This is, hopefully this is informative. This is the way this group thinks, and this is the end you get, because ultimately it kind of doesn't make sense. And so you get to these places where it just kind of doesn't make sense. And this is terrible, by the way. I just saw yesterday in Oakland, there was a terrible beating of this poor old Asian man by 4 people who got out of a car who were not white, and they really hurt him badly, and it's terrible. And the news report is calling it white supremacy, and it just, you feel like you're taking crazy pills, because you're like, I don't understand how you get to that, but this is how you get to that. You get to that because the whole world is viewed on race, the whole world is viewed on oppressor and oppressed, and if you don't identify with the oppressed class, then all of a sudden you are also the oppressor. So, I'm not even going to show this. I'll mention it really quickly. You have this Yale psychologist, Yale. Just as an aside, this makes me really sad because Yale was started as a divinity school. I'm just throwing that out there. All right, so they've changed a little bit. Yeah. They delivered a talk, this psychologist delivered a talk called The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind. I'm not even going to mention her name because I don't want to give her the credit for it. You can look it up. It's out there. You can read the whole thing if you want to. The talk was called The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind. In this talk, she called white people demented and out of their minds as a whole, as a in general group, just as a psychological condition. This is all white people in the psychological condition. This is a professor at Yale, I'm just telling you. And she also said that she has fantasies of unloading, this is a quote, unloading a revolver in the head of any white person that got in my way, end quote. I only share that, again, I don't even like talking about this. Can we just talk about Jesus? Okay, so, I have to share this because just imagine if any other race was substituted in there. They would be out of a job, probably in jail. I think they should be in a kind of jail. I mean, that is a terrible, hateful, racist thing to say, period. I don't care who you are. And these are professors in our highest institutions. And we just need to know that this type of thing is not only going on, but being cheered on by the main culture of this country. And it just is leading us into terrible places. So, this system has nothing to do with personal choices. Nothing to do with personal choices. Hear that. And that is another thing that goes specifically against the gospel. It has nothing to do with what you do. It has only to do with the system of power and oppression. Critical race theory, personal choices don't matter. They don't affect whether you succeed or not. Only your race allows you to succeed or not. So this outcome, this is why justice is so important. And if we remake our justice system based on these principles instead of justice, we will literally have systemic injustice. You will be judged based on what you look like rather than what you have done, and that is in no way justice. Again, another way, this cannot be like the gospel where God is the judge and says that we are to have, in many places, I'm not even going to quote all the scriptures, in many places, we have to have just laws to judge the righteous, to judge the wicked. It is a very important principle of both the Old and New Testament that justice is right, that it is righteous. It is not based on how you feel. When we act based on how you feel, again, myriad of scriptures. I'm not going to take the time to read them all right now. You can just do a Google search of where your feelings get you in Proverbs and a bunch of other places. It's not a great place when you act on your feelings. And you all know this. We all know this. We know that we get hot, we get cold, we get angry, we get frustrated, we get all these things, and we do things that aren't the best things. We all know we do that. And now you're basing your whole legal system on these things. Like, this is a terrible idea for a society. So, Delgado and Stefancic criticize the liberal order. And so this liberal order, again, I'm not going to get into the whole theory. I'm loading way too much on you already. And that's the problem of this. This was designed as a legal theory that you would take in a legal course over a semester in law school. I have an hour. So, yeah. Our country was founded, just in like 2 sentences. John Locke is a great philosopher, and he helped develop some of the philosophy that helped found our country. Many of the phraseology was actually used in the Declaration, in the Constitution, because they represent this idea that we can grow and we can be better. That's the shortest version that I can make of this liberal order. But in CRT, in critical race theory, they believe this is actually wrong. These balanced scales do not take into account the evils done to, for instance, minorities in the past. So the only way to achieve justice in critical race theory is to balance these scales in advance. And that is where you hear things like reparations and all these other things for generations long gone, which just becomes very problematic when you try to figure out who deserves what, and then you have people that married other people, and how do you determine who did what, and how do you get to the base of this? I'm not going to spend any more time on that, just because that's a long explanation in itself. I want to get to Ibram X. Kendi, who gives some of the proposals on the side of critical race theory for this. And he wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he has consulted for many schools across the country and many organizations, military organizations, lots of different organizations across the country. He's very popular right now, and the idea of his book is how to be an anti-racist. And the concept of anti-racist, again, if we were normal, regular people and having a conversation, you would say, I want to be an anti-racist. This is part of the church's problem. Everyone in here would say, yes, I don't want to be a racist. Sign me up. Like, where do I sign? I'm doing it. Like, all the way, 100%, every fiber of my being, doing this thing. That's not what they mean at all. It's not just to not be racist. You have to intentionally be less than racist or more than racist, or it gets very confusing which direction that goes. I'll give you an example. Poor Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks, you may or may not have heard of this. Tom Hanks, over when we heard about the anniversary of the Tulsa race riots, which, again, we should learn more about. Terrible, terrible thing that happened. He wrote an article about it, apologized for it, said we need to learn more about it, and people said, great, you did a great job, thank you for doing all that, you are not a racist. You got the check mark for that. Then an article, I didn't put it up because, again, it takes so much time to do all these things, and you don't have the attention anyway. It's too much. I'll just summarize it for you. You can go look at the article. Check my work. Don't believe me. It's fine. The article said, no, Tom Hanks, you are not a racist, but you are also not anti-racist. Okay? I know. Just follow me. So the article went on to say, quote, this is according to NPR, National Public Radio, NPR, which we fund. Great. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to not say things. Okay. This is the quote. He is a baby boomer star who has built a sizable part of his career on stories about American white men doing the right thing. That's a movie that he was in. So you have to be an anti-racist. What would this look like in his movies? I have no idea. In Saving Private Ryan, they wanted him to, after they finally found him and everybody's, I don't want to give away the movie, everybody's dead. Anyway, you get to the end and then he high-fives the Tuskegee Airmen. I don't know. I don't know what makes sense in that. Like, I don't know how you fold this in, but he hasn't done enough, and he is not anti-racist, and that's what you have to be. It's not just enough to not be racist. You have to be more than, and this is where we get into, I just want to read from Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Here's his quote. The opposite of racist isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. What is the difference? This is reading from his book. One endorses the idea of a racial hierarchy as racist, or racial equity as an anti-racist. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the root of problems in power and policies. Again, power is the big thing. I know this is a lot of words. One allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist, or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between. There is no not racist. There is no not racist. If you claim you are, this is reading from his book, the claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. So if you say you are not, You are. I'll give just a moment on this. And there's this thing called a Kafka trap. It's sort of a complicated thing. So instead of that, I'm just going to call it begging the question. That's a little easier way to say it. It says that you already know what the answer is going to be, so it doesn't matter how you answer the question, right? And you can't get out of it. So if I'm asked, am I a racist, and I say yes, then I am because I said yes. If I say no, then I am because I said no. You get how that works? So it doesn't matter what I say, I am. All right. He goes on to say, this is Kendi from How to Be an Anti-Racist. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Okay, you hear that language? Does that sound like not the gospel? The way to deal with the sins of the past is to do sins to you here and in the future. Crystal clear, that is not the gospel. That is not the gospel of Jesus Christ in any way. We can admit, again, just to be clear, there were bad laws on the books in the 60s. Bad laws. They were racist laws, 100%. We have gotten rid of all of those laws. There is not a law on the books that I know of that is a racist law. There just isn't. So the idea here is that the playing field is not level. It must be tilted in favor of some disadvantaged others. And if this sounds familiar, that is because this is Marxism, this is communism, this is socialism. It is setting the playing field so that everybody gets the same, so that everybody's outcome is the same. It's not equality that I'm going to give you the opportunity to do as much as you want to do, go as far as you want to go, be the best that you can be. That used to be a slogan. We don't have that anymore. No, the only outcome is if we all end up in the same place. We all have to end up in the same place under this. And that is communism. Again, Cuba, great example of this. And a really weird, if you're watching any of the news, it's a really weird example. I even did a post on Cuba and someone commented, well, my quotation was that Cuba is not a socialist paradise, period. It's just not. And they said, but it's better than before the revolution. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, it really is not. Like, have you seen what's going on over there? Anyway, people, they're crazy. But you just need to look at the history. We keep trying to do this over and over again. I'll just say, I know I'm getting low on time, so I apologize for that. I want to get to some Bible in just a second here, but what I want to say here is this is the same as Marxism. That's why you hear that. It is the same as socialism, communism, because you just switch out rich and poor for races or black and white or whatever. It's just this same power dynamic, the same thing. And what I want to say is that we have this problem where we think we're the smartest people in the world. We just do. We think we're the smartest people that there are. And unfortunately, we're not. And there is someone also that we're not smarter than because he's older than all of us, and that would be the devil. And I know not everything is spiritual, but some things are spiritual. And the devil also is not creative. God is creative. We read about that through the creation and the days and our creation, and we actually are creative. God made us in his image, and therefore we are creative. That's a topic for another day, but that is a beautiful thing to know, that we are creative. But the devil is not, which is why you see the same things recycled over and over and over again, but he is really old, and he is really patient, and he has a long memory, and he will keep trying the same things, so we can look at these things and go, oh, I see what's going on here, and then we have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about this? How do we move forward? Because these types of things always end up in destruction. Again, just look at Cuba. Again, look at the policies. Why have almost 1 million people this year come across the border illegally? 1 million. 1 million people have come across the border illegally on the southern border of now the state where I live, Texas. And the administration has said, without any question, we will allow 0 Cubans into this country. Why? Why would that be? The only reason is they have seen firsthand what communism does, and they understand, and there is no way they're going to vote for any of that shenanigans. Just saying, sorry, getting a little preachy in here. All right, talk about gospel. We've looked at the problem, we've looked at the definition, a little bit of the history, and some of the application, how it plays out, and we want to look at a little bit of the solution. What do we do about this? The first thing is, just simply, I think we need to preach the gospel. I do. I think we need to preach the gospel. I think, unfortunately, we also live in a civilization where people don't know. People don't know the Bible, people don't know the gospel, people don't know what it really says. I have a bunch of friends, this is a topic for another day, but just have left Christianity and have made their own Christianity or have their own spirituality or whatever they're doing. It's not following Jesus. People don't know the Bible. We need to preach the gospel. We need to preach the Bible. We need to preach what Jesus actually is talking about. This, to me, actually is the only way forward. We have to understand what Jesus really wants us to do when we follow him, and really what he wants us to do when we love one another. We're going to talk about that in a second. But preaching the gospel, like for instance, Paul says, 1 Corinthians 12:2, just as a body, though one has many parts, all of its many parts come from one body, just so it is in Christ. We all are one part of a body. We are brothers and sisters. We are all different parts. There is no part that is worse or better than one another. We all are parts of the body when we come to faith in Jesus Christ. Second, we are a new creation. This is 2 Corinthians 5:17. We are a new creation. The old is gone and the new is here. We need to recognize that when we are born again, that is a very specific language in the gospel. It means that we step out of our old life and we step into our new life. The old has gone, the new has come. These are Paul's words intentionally to let us know that the things we had in the past, the sin we had in the past, the problems that we had in the past can be over. Jesus has defeated the power of the sin and the grave, and we need to move on from that. And that has context within this discussion because we need to live as though that were true. We cannot judge people on the sins of their grandfather's grandfather. That's not fair. They didn't do it. They didn't live there. And we don't even judge people based on the sin that they had last week because Jesus says, you're white as snow. We need to live in a different way. Now, that doesn't mean you don't know your history. It doesn't mean you don't know your roots. I have a Jamaican brother-in-law, and I love him. And man, I love when he talks so much. I love him, and I love his history, and I love his culture. And we should know history and culture, and we should celebrate history and culture. But we cannot judge people based on history and culture. Do you understand the difference? Right? So we are a new creation in Christ. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. And the image of God is another hour I could go. I won't. Critical race theory is antithetical to Christianity in a bunch of ways, but the image of God is a big one. And this is probably the biggest one for me. It's Galatians 3:28. We are neither slave, free, Jew, Greek, etc. He is saying that this is not about our external or even internal circumstances. It is about who we are in Christ. Yes, we can look at culture, we can celebrate different things, we can celebrate history, we can celebrate all kinds of things. I was telling somebody earlier today, I grew up, the person next to me was from Italy, the person on the other side was from Iraq, like actual Iraq, in the 90s. I mean, it was crazy. There were some crazy stories there. But I had the best food and the best culture, and I didn't know any different. I was just a kid enjoying learning different cultures and I didn't know enough to hate them. I just was having fun and enjoying friends, and it was wonderful. And this idea of teaching kids to discriminate, to hate one another is just, I have a lot of words. I'm trying to filter words. It's just bad. It's just bad. I'll leave you with that bland word there. The way forward is to be humble before God. The gospel is God and sin and redemption. God's goal is justice, as we talked about. Critical race theory's goal is actually inequity. You heard the definition. It is present discrimination, future discrimination. The whole point is we need to tilt the scales so that there is inequity, so that equity will be achieved later. That is the opposite of what God talks about. And this original sin, as we learn about in Romans 3, all have sinned, affects everyone. The original sin is original sin. That's just what it is. There are things like the 1619 Project that says, almost specifically, the original sin of America is slavery. There was slavery. Yes, we need to teach that. We need to learn from the evils of that. That's not original sin. Original sin is original sin. That's why this theory, it just doesn't go all the way. And ultimately, it's trying to replace God. And I could go on and on. I'm going to stop with that and just say, personally, one of the things we do is to be faithful to God. And again, I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know if you believe in Jesus. If you want to talk to me about that, I would love to talk to you about that. But we need to be faithful to God and get ourselves in order. Paul talks a lot about that. Again, don't look at somebody and point out the toothpick in their eye when you got a big wooden plank sticking out of your eye. That's saying hey, you got to get yourself right. You need to figure out what is going on in your heart and get right with God and be faithful to God and take those steps. And when we are, then we can be one in the Spirit, as God talks about. And we need to love others. I'm wrapping up really quickly here, sorry. We are called to love one another. This is one of two of the big commandments that Jesus gives us. Love God, that's being faithful, we talked about that, and love others. Jesus is perfectly clear about that, but this is a personal choice. And this is why socialism sounds so good. Socialism sounds good, Marxism sounds good, critical race theory, being critical of racism, it sounds good. Communism even sounds good. If we could all be the same, if we could all have the same, if there would be no disparities, if there would be no differences, if we would all have the same amount of stuff, that sounds amazing. I love that. Let's do that. Unfortunately, this is the real world, and the real world just doesn't work like that. All of these people in the Frankfurt School, and Marx before that, and Hegel before that, and Kant even before that. Again, I'm getting off into the weeds, which is what all these guys did. But we can't have heaven on earth. They all talked about a utopia. It doesn't work that way. This world is a little bit broken, and we just have to exist in the real world and practice what really happens. And the problem with socialism, communism, Marxism is that you're forced to do what they tell you to do. You're forced to equal things out. That's why you're seeing Cuba right now where they don't have anything, because anybody who had something got that taken away, and anybody who didn't have something still didn't have something. Again, the theory says when you take away the things from the people that have things, you give them to the people that don't. Unfortunately, every single time, the people that take it go, I'm going to give it to you later. And then there's some people who are living a great life over here and everybody else. It happens every time because humans all have sinned. We fall short. We're broken. We do the wrong thing. So we cannot be compelled as a society to do the right thing. The only way to do the right thing is to follow after God. Again, that's my biblical perspective. You don't have to agree with that. You can choose to be an atheist. You can choose not to believe in God. That's your choice. You can choose to go down this path. You can look at Cuba and see how that worked out. But according to Jesus, the only way is to follow him. And the culture wants all of this to happen at school. That's why you just heard a proposal that we'll have 2 more years of preschool, and I think it was 2 or 4 more years, I can't remember, it doesn't matter, of 2 more years of college free because they want to raise your kids. And teachers, I'm not saying you're bad. I know, there are fantastic teachers. My wife is one of the most fantastic teachers that I know. But when you look at the people who are running these things, they do want to tell your kids what to do. And I'll just say, from my perspective and from a biblical perspective, this type of morality, this type of faith, this type of religion, as this kind of operates, it needs to start in the home. It needs to start in the family. Don't send your kids off to learn all these things. They need to go learn things. I'm sorry if you're here, kids. Some kids are not smart. You need to learn things. That's why you go to school. You need to learn more things. That's just it. And yes, we need teachers. We need teachers to teach kids things. But we also need families to teach morality. We need dads and fathers and husbands to lean in and teach faith and teach religion and how to be a good man in this world and to have good families and strong families. And then we need to branch that out into be good churches and good communities around. And then finally, I'll just leave with this. We need to get involved. That's what you can do. If you're sitting there thinking, great, this guy's just talked about all of these crazy German philosophers of the 18th and 19th century, and I don't care. We do need to get involved. And this is where we've missed some great opportunities, and we've been busy doing soccer and who knows, whatever else. We've done all these other things. We need to get involved in the school boards, get involved, again, in your families, in your friends, in your churches. Get involved and share good news of Jesus. Share morality. Share 10 Commandment-like values and how you're supposed to live. I'm not talking about being legalistic. I'm not talking about being puritanical. I'm just talking about how do you live according to following Jesus. And we need to do that, and we need to help people do that. And we need people on school boards. We need people to be elected officials that are doing these kinds of things. I just talked to an elected official in Texas when we were talking about some of these things, and he had not heard of many of these things, and he just had been elected to be a city commissioner or something like that. They have a bunch of weird words, it doesn't matter. And I said, wow, you are in such a great place because you get to go in and know some of these words, know biblical foundation, and you get to protect when some of these ideas come up, and they will come up. You can say, ooh, I don't think that's a good idea. And you can be kind and you can be firm about it and just say, like, yeah, let's not do these kinds of things. So get involved and speak up. Your voice may just be what somebody needs to hear about this, or again, as I started, I just want people to know about Jesus. If we could stop talking about all this, I would be super happy. I just want people to know about Jesus, but this is the culture we live in. This is the place we live. Again, as Paul walked around in Athens, you just have to know some things so that you can go up and so you can have these conversations and try to help people learn more about what is going on. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you for a few minutes. I appreciate it. I think Adam is going to come up maybe with a couple of questions, and this is proverbially just kind of the tip of the iceberg. It's such a complicated subject, but I hope that at least I have helped you understand a little bit of the ideology, a little bit of kind of what is behind the scenes, and more than anything, the language, so that when you hear some of these words, even if you don't hear that overarching term, critical race theory, you just know people are talking about this. Whether or not they even know it, I don't know. I give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't, but let's just be graceful. We always need to be graceful with these things. We don't want to get angry. We just want to help people understand that this just is not the way. So what do you have for me, Adam?
Hey, thanks, Matt. So the caveat that everybody in this position always gives is a lot of great questions. No way we're going to get to them all. So sorry about that if you submitted one and we don't get to it tonight. Matt, I will lob you 2 softballs right off the bat here, and then we may give the floor to 1 or 2 others. One question was, are there any resources you would recommend for the reading? And then related, is there a link to a site that has all of the articles and clippings and videos that you had? Any way that people can get access to those after the facts? Those 2 questions first.
The ones that I did, is that the question?
Yeah, well, so both articles or books for further reading, and then, the AV
I can post some of the resources that I gave. I don't have those posted right now. It is again, it's kind of like a black hole. It really is. There is so much information, and there's so much disinformation, or I guess misinformation is the new term we're using. Anyway, too soon. There's just so much going on. I can work on posting this if you want to look at it. So I have a couple of books. I want to start with this one. This is called Cynical Theories, and I want to start with this one because this is not written by Christians, which is a point of contention that this is not necessarily, though it is antithetical to Christianity and the gospel. It's not necessarily about that. This is really about society. This is really about the rule of law, the way this country was set up, and the whole thing breaks down if we go this direction. So these 2 people, Pluckrose and Lindsay, have done a marvelous job going through the history. This is a very deep book. It's fantastic. It's a bit of a thinking intellectual read, but it will give you more than you wanted to know about all of these theories. And it also, I'll just give like a warning, a disclaimer perhaps, because they are not Christian. It goes into some weird places, but these theories go into weird places. So if you want to know more than you wanted to know, this is a good place to start with that. As I mentioned, Vodi Bakum is a really great thinker. He has written this Fault Lines, excellent book, and it helps you understand from a Christian worldview a lot that has happened. He has a very interesting history. I won't get into the full range of the book, but this is, if you're looking from a Christian worldview, both on the history of the movement of capital T theory and the way that it's played out in America and the way that it continues to, and even some of the consequences, he's got some good words in this. And I just picked this up. This just came out. This is Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds by Michael Knowles. He's a podcast host. And it's actually very good. It's very good because his point is language, but he also talks about language through all this theory because that really is the key. The key really is the language, and they continue to try to change language. Like, for instance, you know that we are regressing into hieroglyphics. Did you realize that? Like, we started in hieroglyphics thousands of years ago, and now we're going back. Now it's all just emojis. We don't use words anymore. It's all just emojis. So the latest emoji coming out is the pregnant man. This is the new emoji that's coming out. I wish I was joking. I know. It's like, I used to be funny. I used to be a funny person, and I would say jokes, and now all my jokes are just real. I know, it's terrible. It's terrible. But no, that's a real thing. Actually, the funniest thing that somebody talked about was that it was an Italian person who said, "Now I finally have an emoji to say when I'm like really full." Anyway, I try to make lemonade out of lemons. Anyway, those are a couple of resources. There are some others, but those would probably be my top 3 to start. Actually, if you only want to do one, I would recommend Fault Lines, because from my perspective and the Christian perspective, I think he does the best job on this. Someone had asked about website things. Again, I don't have this posted on my website. If you want more information than you can deal with, again, James Lindsay's website is newdiscourses.com, and that has a lot of information. Neil Shenvi, Shenvi, Neil Shenvi Apologetics, you can search that. He is a Christian homeschool apologist, I think is how he describes himself, but he has done some fantastic work on this and many other subjects, again, from a Christian worldview. The New Discourses is not necessarily from a Christian worldview. If you want your head to explode, the New Discourses, James Lindsay actually has a podcast called New Discourses where he goes deep into what the Hegelian dialectic. I tried not to use too many big words, but that is a subject all on its own that we will not get into any more than that. But if you want, again, to go way, way deeper than you ever thought you could, he has like hours-long podcasts on all of those things. Did that kind of sufficiently answer those first 2? I don't know what our time is, 7:30. Do you want to do a couple more? Or?
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks, Matt. And I'll also just mention, whoever asked, everybody else is curious. There was a question about different minimum sentences for crack cocaine abuse versus cocaine abuse. Vodi Bakum addresses that in his book Head On, and so I would just recommend that for that question specifically rather than taking the time to get into it tonight. Don't want to dodge the issue entirely.
Yeah.
A lot of the other questions were all sort of clustered around schools,
Yeah.
CRT in schools, and sort of a practical, so what do we actually do? And good news is we have 2 ladies here tonight who can add some really specific expertise for us. What I'm going to do, Matt, is give the floor to each of them in turn, and then I'll give you a chance to sort of call your thoughts on practical advice. What do we actually do as far as parents, as teachers, community members, to take a stand with school boards and things like that? So first, I'm going to go out on a limb here. There is a Lois Kanashiki. Could I ask wherever you are, Lois, to stand up? Come on up, Lois. Lois and I met at 5:50 tonight. I normally don't turn the mic over at a public event to somebody I meet 10 minutes ahead of time. But in all the intense research I did on you and your organization back there, I'm going to take the leap. So if this goes awry, blame it on my poor judgment in a 10-minute call rather than a full endorsement. But Lois, I think it would be best just to hand it over to you and let you explain who you are and why you're here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. I just found out about this presentation earlier today. I live in Enola, outside of Harrisburg, and I wanted to come down and see the presentation, but more importantly, get to talk to all of you because I'm working with an organization, a nationwide organization called No Left Turn in Education. We just started this past year, and we are working to help parents and grandparents and taxpayers and everyone fight this critical race theory indoctrination in our schools, K through 12. And it's very dangerous, and I've been involved in education reform for a very long time. I was on the school board in Hollidaysburg, where I used to live from 2015 to 2019, and I think education is very important that we do it right. And this is all very dangerous. So I believe we are not going to stop this without getting people who agree with us on school boards, and they are elected. And in 2023, there will be 5 school board members up for election in your school district. And we need your help. There's 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. That's a lot of schools. We need your help in recruiting candidates who are willing to do this for 2023. That's approximately 2,500 people we need just in Pennsylvania to help us stop this in our schools. And I will just tell you, Michael mentioned that he didn't know if this was in our schools or not in our schools right now. I will tell you, if it's not in your schools now, it's coming. And the buzzwords are diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they will change as soon as everyone finds out they'll change the words, because that's what they do. But what Michael is talking about with the Marxism, that's what the equity is. And this started with Common Core, and now they're just going to the next step. Equity means that everyone has to end at the same place. Okay, it doesn't mean every child gets to achieve to their potential or to their ability. It doesn't mean that. We're going to stop that. Now it means everyone's going to get to the same place. So you can see where that is going. It means dumbing down of education even more. And it means the systemic racism. We all have to accept America is systemically racist, and racism will be integrated into every single subject in school from K through 12, and they're already doing it. And it's not going to stop unless we have people on the school board who are willing to stand up to it. I promise you, this is the only way we can really fight it. And when you say 2023, it seems like a long time away. This isn't going away tomorrow. This is the sword I am falling on to fight. It's that important. It's important for our country, to save our country, and to save this generation of children. Yeah. So I'm going to stick around when I'm done, and I thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I'm so grateful. But I'm going to stick around when we're done, and if anybody would like to speak to me, and I've given out some of my cards, and please, anybody can call me if you're interested in helping. Even if you don't want to be a candidate, we need your help finding candidates. So I'm going to help you do that. So use me, and let me help you here in Franklin County, so we can, in 2023, we're going to take it back for the people and for God and for our kids. Thank you.
Okay, so you're up for school board or helping someone else get a school board. Stick around, talk to Lois afterwards. And then we also have Michelle Jansen here from 103.7. Our church here at Antrim has had the privilege really of partnering with 103.7 the last couple of years. Did an event up at Scotland campus with Pennsylvania Family Institute. And as far as somebody who knows what's going on in Chambersburg and the local area, this is as much of an expert as we can find. So I'm just going to ask Michelle to fill us in on what's going on locally.
Thank you. Before I get to that, I just want to quickly say, I want to boil something down here based on what you have shared with us tonight. Because I, on my radio station, I begged teachers and school board members to come here tonight. I said, even if you don't think that's true that we're teaching critical race theory, if you don't, well, that's nonsense, or that's just some kind of political thing that they're playing with. And I'm appreciative, because I do hear there are teachers and school board members here tonight. I think the bottom line is to understand where these concerns are coming from, and that this has to be a conversation between different sides and different viewpoints, because if we don't do that, we're in big trouble. And I think we really pointed out the fact here that, and you might say, oh, well, this was from a Christian point of view. They're just talking about spreading Christianity. No, I mean, this is from a Christian point of view here tonight. But the point is, this is a viewpoint versus viewpoint. This is belief system versus belief system. Critical race theory, or critical theory, I call it critical social justice, it is a way of interpreting life. It's a way of interpreting the world. Now, you might very well believe that, and that's great. And you may believe that this is the way God wants us to interpret the world. The Bible does. That happens to be myself as well, is great. But it is a belief system. It's a viewpoint. And we've decided in public schools we cannot have teachers teaching exactly that in public schools, right? We even took prayer out of school. Well, if you're going to do that and you're going to insist on that for public schools, then you can't have critical social justice being taught in public schools, because it's a way of interpreting the world, of interpreting life. That's not for teachers in public schools. And if you're going to insist on doing that, then please give the money to parents for them to send their children to the school that will both educate them and teach them the point of view, the way of interpreting the world. Or get it out of public school, because the whole point, everybody said, was you cannot teach philosophy, theology, or that kind of a viewpoint in public school. Well, then don't. And if you're going to, then give parents the money so they can choose the viewpoint they want their children to have. I just wanted to make that clear, that that's a way you can look at the way you've presented
Yeah,
it,
you're
Matt?
absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So sorry to take that time, but I just want to make that clear because it's important for us to understand why people have concerns. And yes, that book you pointed out, those two authors are atheists. They're not Christians, but they see the danger of this viewpoint and the dangers it can present if we lose the idea of objectivity and scientific method and some of the wonderful things we've learned since the Enlightenment that benefits all human beings. So I'll just let that go. But now, Chambersburg. People who may be aware that on their Facebook page, I kind of threw a monkey wrench in there a couple months ago when I said, attention parents, they're going to teach your children critical race theory, get to the school board meeting this week. And I got blowback from that, and teachers and school board members both, and the superintendent told me I'm wrong, we're not teaching critical race theory at Chambersburg. Now, honestly, I think a couple of them who said that were sincere, because I think it's what we talked about. Definitions are difficult. What people understand, what is critical race theory is difficult. You'll hear from the academics that this is a theory from law school, Harvard in the 1970s, 1980s. And, well, yeah, that is the academic portion, but that's not what it's morphed into with the help of postmodernism, radical feminism, with the way universities have embraced this in a very unscholarly manner, and you'll find that out if you read cynical theories. It's now become standard in education for our teachers. And not only our newer teachers, they're getting it just as truth when they're given their teaching degrees from most teaching universities. Also, ongoing development for teachers. They're getting a lot of this, but it's not necessarily told to them, this is critical race theory and this has these roots. I think a lot of teachers don't necessarily understand that. They're presented that this is fairness and we use the word equity, it gets sort of twisted. People think of equality, which I think we all believe in. There's just a lot of the things that we got into in this talk tonight, and if you do some further research, I think people in education, you have to be honest, this has really come into engulfing a lot of the way our teachers are taught to look at their classrooms as little democracies, and the students can teach you as much as you can teach them, and it's a lot of these things that, if you just look at them individually, don't sound so bad, but when you put it all together, you start to realize it is an interpretive viewpoint of the world. In Chambersburg, the problem, what caught my attention was they were touting, there was a website called A Long Talk 2020, and they were touting that Chambersburg was the first K-12 school to partner with them in the country. This particular training program is very popular with universities, especially through the athletic portions of universities. And you'll look at their website. It's Penn State, it's Gettysburg College, it's many, many universities have taken part with this training. And it's to teach you how to be an anti-racist. And as you're hearing a little bit tonight, if you look into Ibram X. Kendi and what it means to be an anti-racist, this is all part and parcel with critical race theory. It's very much systemic racism, oppression, anti-racism. Everything's either racist or anti-racist, and it's very much part of that. I don't think the principal of one of the schools, Mr. Nepper, came to address it at the school board meeting to push back on what I said, to say, no, this is not critical race theory. He talked about the training program. He touted it. He thought, oh, I learned a lot there, and it was great. Well, the head of that program called me, the CEO, and he invited me to take the training. So I did. And when I took it, it only confirmed everything I had been looking at on their Facebook page and everything else. It is critical race theory. And in fact, one of the assignments was, you saw that graphic up there from the African American Smithsonian Museum that talked about whiteness and white culture. They had a similar graph like that. It was a pyramid. It was one of the assignments we had to do, and one of the source materials for that assignment was critical race theory. So I don't know how he missed that, but and when you take it, it gives you some of the information from the 1619 Project. Some of you might know what that is. It also gave a lot of very real and terrible history in the United States, but it was very condensed. It was presented in a very emotional way. This wasn't good academic training. This was propaganda, because it was a lot of truth, but given in a context that is not the way you'd want teachers to be being trained about this. Like I said, it was emotional. It was very one-sided. You weren't allowed to criticize it, because I asked if I could have comments like that, and they told me, no, it's not a dialogue, it's a conversation. I didn't quite understand the difference. You know, how do you have a conversation if somebody can't ever bring up an opposite point of view? But they didn't want that. They really just wanted you to learn their methods for evangelizing. And I will use that word because their slogan is, we want an anti-racist at every dinner table. Well, that's an activist. That's an activist point of view. That's not teacher training, trying to really understand this stuff. And we do. I think it's necessary, and the thing is, there is grains of truth in all of this, and we do need to understand these things, and we do need to understand our real history. There were lousy textbooks through the 1900s that the kids were getting in school. They were whitewashed, and they were terrible, and you were not learning the real history. That's all really important, and we should have that. But we shouldn't be having a point of view, a way to interpret the world. And they'll say, well, we're not changing the curriculum. The curriculum is the same. But it's, and I keep saying, pedagogy. Pedagogy is the way a teacher teaches the children. It's the way they give them the material. It's the way they help them to interpret the material. And if you're doing it from the critical social justice point of view, then you're giving them an ideology. And that's the problem. Teachers are being taught to teach this way, and they're being told this is great, and it's very supported, and this is the best way to teach kids. So I don't blame the teachers. This is what they're getting. But I beg you, if you are a teacher, please read that book. Look at some of the criticism so you understand what the flaws in some of this stuff might be. Because sadly, you're not going to get it in the teaching world right now. And so that's the point. Then the superintendent, after I told them that, I said I took the class, it was propagandistic, it did have critical race theory in it. Then I was told vaguely by the superintendent, well, we're not doing that anymore. I'm like, what do you mean? Now, they paid $6,000, I think, to get the licensing rights to be able to run it. The last, I did a right to know, and the intermediate unit gave me material, and they said, we're going to be running a critical Long Talk 2020. We're going to be running it all summer. They made mention of teachers using flex time to view it, which, in my opinion, that means they're going to pay them for taking the course. And they said it will be running, and they gave dates for it. Well, I said, well, what about this? Are we doing this? Oh, well, that was just one teacher's opinion. He just liked it, and I can't control what one teacher likes, seeming to forget that he had sat there in a school board meeting and said how wonderful it was. And, of course, they paid $6,000 to get some rights to be able to view this. They told me it's not mandatory. Okay. But it still sounded like they were very much encouraging the teachers to do it. Now, I said, well, what are you doing? And they told me, well, we don't know. We haven't had much time to work on it. So apparently what I found out from the Lincoln Intermediate Unit, which they're getting $30-some thousand to help develop teachers in diversity, equity, inclusion, they did all this stuff in April. They used an equity survey. Now they're not using that. They use the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium. I said, are you still using the consortium? I didn't get a straight answer on that. So we're not exactly sure what they're doing right now, and I'm going to keep filing right to knows, but please, if you would like to know, please contact your school board member, see what they tell you, and then, I guess we're going to have to start filing right to knows to get the exact information on how the teachers are being trained, what materials they're using. And again, I don't fault the teachers. I know go and look at TED Talks, go and look at any of these education sites. It's full of this, and it's presented in a very one-sided way. But we do need to educate ourselves. These are our kids, and they deserve for our teachers, our school board members, and us to understand what is now being considered just a normal way of teaching kids in our country now. In universities, it's very, very strong. My daughters are in 2 Pennsylvania universities, and they get it every day. So I guess I'll be quiet now. We've gone long enough, but I'm very thankful, especially for all the teachers or school board members or anyone who wants to understand why people are fired up. And if you are fired up, but you don't quite understand, it doesn't seem right, please educate yourself, because it's very hard to push back if you don't understand some of the history of it, where it's coming from, and what it means. So, does that?
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So, general question, just from your perspective, anything you want to add, Matt, as a parent? What do you do if you suspect this in the school, as practical as possible?
Yeah, I think we've covered it. I think getting involved in the school board, what do I say? And again, I don't live here, so I don't know exactly how this happened here. What I can say, having been in California, which is probably one of the furthest along this curve, like for instance, the county that I was in California, has said for the fall they are removing grades from their school system. No, I'm serious. They're removing grades because certain races did not get the right grades, and so the answer is to remove the grades. I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you. So you just need to know. You just need to look at it, and you can go on. You can go online. You may have seen some of this. My kids had to do Zoom classes for all year because California was closed to everything. But in California, in some of our classes, in classes and Zoom classes around the country, you're hearing there are student agreements, there are parent agreements where the parents are not allowed to be in the Zoom meetings with the kid. There are teachers who have been recorded saying, your parents need to get out of the room because I need this time with your kid to tell them what they need to know. And the parents are getting in the way of the teaching. If you're hearing any of these kinds of things, these are not good things. Again, I'm not condemning any teacher in here. I don't know what's happening here. I'm just saying, if you're involved, then you start hearing some of these kinds of things and you say like, no, I'm the parent. You're not the parent. I'm going to parent my kids. You get to, in loco parentis, you are in place of the parent for this period of time, but you don't get to parent in place of me. So you need to just get involved, join the school boards, join the PTAs or whatever the equivalent is called here, and just pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. There are great schools in America still. There are. There are some great schools by me in Texas. There are also some other types of schools by me in Texas. You can read some things. I'm not going to call out any names here. It doesn't matter. But you just have to get involved. You just have to check this kind of thing out. And as Michelle was saying, one of the interesting things, I'll just end with this, is about, yeah, good. I'll just end with this. One of the interesting things about these people, this is Pluckrose and Lindsay, is his original point of research was into cults and religion. His original point was, how do you indoctrinate someone into a cult, which is where he came upon some of these theories, and specifically critical race theory and some of the other ones, because they do operate kind of like a cult, and they have a teleology. They have an end point, which is the heaven on earth. They have a process by which you are converted. They have, if you know your Reformation history, brethren in Christ, you know that one of the big reasons for the Reformation was the indulgences that the Catholic Church was selling you so that you could get right with God. You had to buy these things, and once you bought these things, then you're right with God. It operates like that. You have to show that you're anti-racist so that you get some salvation, maybe for a limited time, however that works. There are parallels all along the way. It really does operate like a religion, or really more like a cult, and that becomes one of the problems, because when you push back on a cult, if you've ever met anybody in a cult, and unfortunately I've talked to a lot of people who have been through some of these situations, it's really hard to talk through it. It's really hard to, you know, they talk about woke, but it's really hard to awaken somebody into what reality looks like. It's just hard. It is like you're wearing glasses, but you don't know you're wearing glasses, so you're seeing the world in certain ways. And how do you help somebody take those off? And how do you help somebody get to view the world? And again, it's not just for believers. This really is like society level. It sounds doom and gloom, but it's society level changing, because just look at Cuba. I don't want to live there. I mean, I can love them. I don't want to live there. And we don't want to go that way. We've done a very good job. There's this thing, again, America is not a god. We should not worship America. However, America has created this very, very unique freedom. It really is unique. If you've studied history at all, this doesn't happen by accident. Cuba happens every time if we let ourselves do what we do. That is what happens every time. Just look at history of the world. Look at any civilization. America has done something different and intentional, and it's been really good because we fight for this value of giving people freedom based on their image in Christ. That really is what it is. It's that every inherent individual has value. These types of systems don't give individuals value. So whether you're not believing in Jesus or not, like, people have value. And when you start throwing them into identity groups that then don't have value, that is just society breaking. That breaks the whole society, and we should not go down those roads. So yeah, get involved in your schools and do those types of things, but you really just need to keep the bigger picture in mind and do just love people. We don't want to bash people over the head. Many people, as she said, like they don't even understand this, because like a cult, you've been so indoctrinated into it. Most people don't know they're in a cult. It's just true if you've studied any of that. It's just the way it goes. And it's hard to even talk about that. I don't like talking about it that way, but that is a little bit of the psychology that happens when you're dealing with this type of thing. So I'll leave it at that. You want to close up, Adam?
That's great. Can we give Matt a round of applause and say thank you?
Yeah.
Obviously, a complex issue. I can't hit it all. If I could end just with one story in a different but not unrelated issue, we heard a story at the PFI event about an inclusion ordinance, and the mayor of a certain town was leaning towards signing. The mayor was to split a 3-3 tie, maybe leaning towards signing this new inclusion ordinance. And the reason why he decided not to is he said he had received 500 letters regarding the ordinance. 478 of them were urging him not to sign it. It makes a difference. So we keep talking about getting involved, and what we mean by that is read the book, pick up a book or two, read, but attend meetings, pick up a phone, make a phone call. It's not hard. You can get on any public official's website, make a call, leave a voicemail, send an email, show up at meetings, send a letter. And if we speak and speak the truth graciously and in love, it can make a difference. So thank you, Matt, for coming. I'd like to close us with a word of prayer. And Father God, we trust you. We are grateful for your sovereign control, your providence over all things. And we pause to remember that you are at work in times like this. And so we pray that you would refine your church, that you would grow us into the image, the character of Christ, shape us through the very challenges that we face, and we pray that you would lead us individually and as your church collectively. Thank you for tonight, and use it to equip us going forward. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen. One final word. Sorry, I meant to do this before the prayer. Matt, we mentioned, is a podcaster. His podcast is called Church Public. If you go to what do you say? All the socials, YouTube, Facebook, churchpublic.com, anywhere you get a podcast and look. I recommend him driving in the car, brushing your teeth, hypothetically. He's great to listen to, great content. Obviously, the message from this morning, get on the Answers website and listen to that as well. And thank you all for coming. And go, and as Matt would say, keep the faith.